When I say duty you would have to exist, or you'd have to admit is also real then as a concept.
What do you mean by duty?
Obligations that you have absent entitlements. And I would classify rights as being entitlements you have absent obligations.
So you said a duty is an obligation absent an entitlement?
Yeah.
And then you said that, what was the second?
That for a right, it would be an entitlement absent a duty.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't actually see any duties women have in modernity. None. Like no actual duties.
Duties to what?
Anything.
You don't, like in a moral sense or?
No, in any sense. So I see a lot of entitlements, rights, entitlements absent duties. So you have the right to vote, no duty to vote, right to own a gun, no duty to own a gun, right? You have the right to incriminate or not incriminate yourself, but no duty to incriminate yourself or not to incriminate yourself, right? Every one of these rights is an entitlement. There's no duty which comes along with it. So I think that in a time before feminism, let's say, especially the 1900s, that instead of women and men in this case moving towards a materialistic outlook, they focused a lot more on duties instead of entitlements themselves. And I think that has been very bad for society, the focus on materialism from feminism.
Okay, maybe just to get more clear on that term duty, being an obligation absent entitlement. What you're saying is that, somebody should act or needs to act, right, without being given anything to act?
No, they could be given orders to act. That could be considered a duty.
That's not what I'm saying. Okay, maybe there was some miscommunication there, but something that, you should do whether or not you're rewarded for it or something like that. Is that something like what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So
some obligation to do, some obligation absent entitlement to perform X action.
Okay.
Now, that's not a perfect definition, but I think it's a workable one for the purpose of the conversation.
Okay, so you think that, women don't have any duties, but they do have...
But I think men do. I think men have duties.
Can we get clear on if you're making a descriptive claim or if you're making some sort of prescriptive claim?
Descriptive.
Descriptive? Okay, so you think that men have duties and women don't?
Yes.
And that you think that women have rights and men don't have rights, or they do?
I think that women have more rights than men do. So this would come down to my argument for conscription. It's very simple. Men have a duty and obligation to sign up for the draft. Women have no such obligation or duty to do so, but women can still vote to send men to wars and then not fight in them because they can't be drafted. So I would consider that to be an extra right that women have that men do not have, because they are they actually have to sign up and be conscripted during wartime.
Okay, sure.
And absent wartime.
Okay, so this is argument feminism bad because men have to go to the draft and women don't, and they both get the right to vote?
No, this is an argument for materialism. I'm just expressing that when we moved away from a duty-based society for women, I can't think of any actual obligations that women have as far as duties to society, but I can think of actual obligations that men do have still as a duty to society. And so it seems that women themselves actually have more rights in modern society than men do. And also, right, that a lot of this movement towards the idea of more additional rights comes from materialism itself. Everything seems to staunchly revolve around I want, me, I want, because it feels good.
Okay. Sure. I'm not sure. Maybe we could get more clear on materialism there. I'm not for the draft. I am for people voting. I think people should vote. So if you're making descriptive claims about okay, well, you think that this moved towards materialism, and I'm thinking maybe you're talking about Marxist materialism, or do you mean something totally, do you mean materialism in a totally different field? Yeah,
in this case, very simple, right? I'm just using materialism in the sense of stuff in the replacement for something that is not stuff. For instance, if we're talking about concepts of God, of country, of nation, of state, things like that, which could be fulfilling. And materialism would be the idea that like stuff can be fulfilling, like actual material goods, things like this can be a form of fulfillment.
Okay, so materialism, from what you're defining, is that material goods can be fulfilling.
Yeah.
Okay, this has to do what with feminism?
That what feminism has done is move women more towards materialism than duties. Duties would be this idea of the conceptualization of I ought to do things outside of because it feels good, whereas materialism is I'm going to get this stuff because it feels good.
Right. I mean, I can think that people should do things because I think it would have good outcomes for them. Like, I think that people should vote because I think that that helps them pursue their political goals more. And I think that people enjoy freedom. I think that's good for people's well-being, is to have personal freedoms.
Doesn't seem to be. It seems to be that limiting people's personal freedoms is pretty good for their well-being.
Well, it seems, okay, well, in some senses you would agree with that. In some senses you wouldn't, I assume.
Yeah, in some. There you can make delineation thresholds, but everybody voting has been a disaster. It's been terrible.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that by everybody being able to collectively vote rather than people at stake in the system, what's been able to happen is that the Treasury has been able to be robbed by the collective power of the vote. So what happens is politicians end up creating voting blocks. They pit the voting blocks against each other. And all of these various blocks are trying to raid the Treasury essentially for their own personal agendas. Every single block that I can think of, in fact, is trying to raid the Treasury based on an agenda.
Right, but presumably you think some of those agendas are good, and two, you think that generally there's also good outcomes from everybody voting, right?
No, there's generally not good outcomes from everybody voting.
There's not a single good outcome, or
I didn't say there's not a single good outcome. I'd never put it in a monolith, but
that's a question.
I just answered the question. I would not say that there's never a single good outcome.
Right. So you just happen to believe that the good outcomes don't outweigh the bad outcomes.
Well, yeah, that's how I would weigh anything when it came to the political process, right?
Right. So, okay, I mean, we can just take, for example, you think that it's generally good, just prima facie good, to protect individual freedoms, right? Like
to a degree.
Well, I think I can probably give you infinitely many cases where you would say it's good to protect I think I can give you infinitely
many cases in the opposition where you would think it was really good to limit them.
Probably not in the real world. Like I can take, for example, okay, you waking up and breathing this morning. Mm-hmm. That's a right that's a personal freedom that should be protected.
Me waking up and owning a machine gun, is that a personal right that should be protected?
That's going to hinge on like an that's going to be some like empirical claim that I don't.
It's not an empirical claim.
Like whether or not you.
What do you mean?
No, whether or not I think that that's a right that should be protected is going to hinge on empirical data. So whether or not that causes more bad outcomes.
Can I own a nuke?
I think probably there would be really bad outcomes if you owned a nuke.
Yeah, probably. So you'd want to limit that, right?
Right.
What about a battleship with like Uzis strapped to it that did a like 360 turnstile, just mowing everything down? I should probably not have that either, right? Or hand grenades.
Right. And those are instances that we don't currently have. I'm talking about literally from you breathing to you sitting at the table to you holding a pen to you wearing a shirt to you being in the studio to being in America. To you being able to drink water. All of those things are personal freedoms. And you believe that all of those things should be protected. And there's probably less of those like insane scenarios
breathing's not a right? What do you mean? You don't have a right to breathe. It's a function of what you do.
You have
There's
a right
not
to
an
life.
Empirical right to it.
Right, but you have a right to life, and stopping you from breathing.
Do you have a right to life, or do you have a concept that you have a right to life?
Yeah, the right is the concept.
The concept,
remember?
yeah. So the idea here is the concept. Yeah, I'm not sure that people have a right to life. Like if you steal my TV, I don't think you have a right to life.
Well, sure, those rights can be overridden. Those are overriding
because they don't exist. That's why that
doesn't mean that
there's not really anything. So the concept here. Right, it can be overridden and changed because the concept itself is flawed. The idea of rights themselves are flawed. So when you're talking about your like First Amendment right or something like this, when you talk about freedoms in general, I think that we have all sorts of duties which override those rights all the time.
Right. So, but you have to make the case that this is one of those instances where you should override somebody's rights. So when
since
you say,
women
well,
started voting,
hold on, don't interrupt me. That's
you just told me to give you the instances.
very impolite. Very impolite.
Do you think that
But
I'm the only one cutting in?
I think I've probably cut in far less, but look, so you think that there's all of these instances where like you shouldn't have your right to breathe infringed upon, you shouldn't have your, your right to XYZ. That doesn't mean that those things aren't real just because they can be overridden. I don't know what the argument for that would be.
So the concepts themselves, right? These things are changeable concepts, right?
Yeah,
all of them are changeable.
The concept itself is.
And where does the concept exist? Does it exist in all brains, or does it exist in one brain?
Well, I think that people have different concepts of rights.
Right.
But what I am saying, though, is when people say, I have a right to life, they're not saying, I have a right to life in every single imaginable possible scenario. Do you know that?
Do you know that when you express things that you should express them precisely so that I know exactly what it is that you do mean? So when you
sure.
when you say do you know when people say X, what they actually mean is Y? It's no, I don't actually know that, because from what you're saying is when people say X, this is it. You just leave it on rights. That's what people say. And it's now you clarify and say, well, when people say X, they really don't always mean X. Fair enough. I can grant that is true, but you didn't really make that case before.
You're not just granting that it's true, though. Here's what happened, though, is that you said that, there's instances where these rights can be overridden, right? So you do recognize that people, when they say you have the right to life, they aren't talking about the right to life in an absolute sense.
No. That's a pedantic way to look at my words. Maybe my words were sloppy there, right? It's just a way for me to categorize the words that you understand what I'm saying. So I can say override or something like this. If you want to pin me on it, I can use a different word. But the entire idea here, though, is that these are just concepts. Because they're just concepts, they're very changeable in the human experience as concepts. And they only exist in single brains. They don't exist in collective brains, right? They can't. Every single brain has to have some variation of this concept, right?
Sure, but people have general, agreements on what a concept means.
Sure.
So they can approximate as close as they can. But when somebody says, like I said, they have the right to life or they have the right to breathe, I would think that that they're not saying, and also just to reframe this, because you said it's when people are saying they're X, you're saying they actually mean Y. No, I'm saying they mean something like X asterisk, to the right-hand corner.
So
or
actually
something
Y.
like that. That's not what I said. I think that's kind of dishonest.
Well, it can't be X and not X. So it has to be X actually means not X.
Right, but it could be X with an additional clause that's understood to be true. When you have conversations, there are things that you understand with people. There's social cues. I think people typically understand.
I agree.
Rights aren't absolute.
I'm just making sure that if there's a meaningful distinction, we untangle the meaningful distinction. If there's not, we don't.
Sure. Okay. So when people talk about rights, because I guess we'll just get 100% clear on this now. When people talk about rights, they're typically not talking about some absolute, ability to do anything, some entitlement to do anything no matter what.
Okay. I agree.
Sure. So,
but I never thought that was in dispute. What was in dispute is the concepts themselves, right? So the idea is, well, I have a right to do X, and then somebody comes along and says, no, you don't, and puts a bullet in your head, right? Did he have the right, or did you have the right?
Did the person who put the bullet into somebody's head have a right to do that?
Yeah.
Not per the person who they did it to.
Right, exactly. So then these are just concepts. They're individual. They're mind-dependent concepts for individual minds themselves. They're not even collectivized.
Well, there can be rights that we agree upon.
Sure, you can agree. You can agree to them, right? But you can't really say that when somebody else comes along and says, "But I have a right to violate your rights," that they don't have a right to do that. That's the problem with them, right?
They under your frame of rights, they don't have that. Per your standard, they don't have that right.
Yeah, but per their standard, they do.
Yeah, that's just trivially true. If you're just saying a right,
and trivial truths are true because they're true. So the thing is yes, it's trivially true, just meaning it's true that if a person says, "Well, I have the right to kill you," and you say you don't have the right to kill me, right? Mm-hmm. I just want to know who actually here has the right to do what.
Actually has the right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Who here actually has the right to do something? Who here actually can actualize this right?
Okay, the question is, who has the ability to do what they want to do? Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the person with the gun. Do you think
So
that
then
that's in dispute?
what right did that other person actually have?
Well, the person, okay, maybe we should get clear on what you mean by a right. What do you mean by right?
I've already told you like 50 times. It's entitlement absent of duty.
Yeah. So, okay, they have the right, and these rights are, like I believe that I have an entitlement, to my life.
Believe.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they believe that, to them, they had the right. To the other person, they did not have the right.
Right. So in this case, really what it boils down to is your rights are just force, right? Rights
Your
just
are
come
just
down.
force. Force is the way that the rights are protected.
Well, it's the only way they can really exist.
No, they do exist. You admitted that concepts exist, right? So like somebody can...
I can grant that they exist, sure.
Right. So they do exist without force, quote unquote.
Well, no, not actualizing them though.
Actualize. So you didn't get clear what you mean by actualizing.
Yeah, so if you want to have the right to freedom of speech and there's nobody around, I suppose you would have the right to freedom of speech because you're the only mind which has this concept in it. But if you come into contact with another mind who says you don't have the right to freedom of speech, right? How do we determine which mind actually has a right here and which one doesn't? We can't, right? We just say you have a concept in your mind and you have a concept in your mind. But this rights thing, right? This thing doesn't really exist. Just this concept is what exists.
See, you keep saying it doesn't really exist. Of course it exists. Like you said, if you're on the island and nobody's there to infringe upon that right, even if somebody does infringe upon that right, you could still say, well, that person has the right to life. They have the right to speech.
Then people have the right to kill other people if they want to.
Well, that's not what I said. Per that person, they...
No, it is what you're saying.
They would...
It's an
to them,
extension of what you're
that
saying.
statement would be true.
Okay.
To them.
If it is the case that collectively society decides that they have a right to enslave women, they do in fact have that right in reality to do that, don't they?
If you're saying that they're acting on what they believe is to be a right, then yeah. That's what they're doing. That's trivially
So then
true.
what
but
is...
that doesn't... So these
then
are
what is-
descriptive claims, though.
Yeah.
I'm not interested
well,
in
right now
descriptive
we're just
claims.
making sure that we have this. So I just want to make sure I got this right and that we're not speaking past each other. Rights are real as concepts. Concepts are real. Yes. So therefore, if it is the case that conceptually people want to enslave all women and they call that concept a right, then they would have the right to enslave women and that would be a real right that they would have, right?
To them,
Yes.
what you're missing is the index. So, like when I say I have a right, I am talking, like I said, about more so a belief or a value. Sometimes is what I'm referencing. So when somebody says, like, even if someone was in prison wrongfully, maybe like they didn't actually commit a crime, but it was believed that they committed a crime, and that person said, "I have the right to be free." Now, they're not saying something nonsensical. You understand, like, what that person is saying. They're saying, I desire to be free. It's wrong. And what they mean by, it's wrong is it goes against their values for them to be
It just goes against
imprisoned.
It goes against their preferences, right?
Yeah, in that case, so that statement is true.
Yeah, sure, but it's equally true to say, no, we're going to keep you a slave.
Not to that person.
Yeah, not to that person, but just to the other people.
But once again, not to that person, and not to me, certainly.
But if it is the case that rights themselves, being a value of the concept of the mind, these concepts are real, then that would mean that all people who were slaves had the right to be free. That's true. But also that all people who enslave people had the right to enslave them, and that's also equally true, correct?
If what you mean, like we can substitute...
No, this is what you mean.
Yeah, if you let me finish sentences, I can do that.
Okay.
So when you have the people who are enslaving other people, if what you mean by those people saying, I have the right to enslave these people, is that those people are, substituting out their words for like, I have the value that these people are enslaved, then to them, that is true. They do, in fact, have that value.
So for you, a right is simply... Wait, I'm confused now. Now I'm actually confused on your view. You said a right is just a belief?
Yeah, I think, well, when you were talking about like concepts, yeah.
Okay, if it's just a belief, then it's an equally true belief that these people over here, their right to enslave you exists.
It's equally true, and because the wording, I think people use this wording in a weird way sometimes. What would be more accurate to say is that person desires this, they value this, or they prefer this.
Okay, so what gives them the right to something?
That's what I'm saying that the right is. So like
So
usually
it's just
when
a
you
belief.
talk about, well,
Yeah.
you can talk about rights as social contracts, and maybe they're violating a social contract in that way. But when I say like I have a right to be free, a lot of the times what I'm expressing is like, a very strong desire or something like
Yeah,
that.
just a belief that you have.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what those people are saying. So if you're just saying it is true that those people, to them, it is true, I have the right to enslave this person. And if you substitute what they mean by that by I desire to enslave these people or I have a strong will to do so, then that's trivially true. You don't disagree with that, certainly.
Well, with your view, no. This is great. You have to concede that the right is real, that people collectively have the right to enslave people, and that is real. Concepts are real.
And what you
this
mean
belief is real.
by right is it's real in the sense that they do in fact believe or value that thing. Yeah, that is
Now,
true
is
that
that
they in fact believe and value
is
those
that
things.
belief that you can hold people in slavery? Is that a belief which I mean, obviously you're against it, right? I'm not
Right.
saying you're not.
Of course.
But that belief, this value which is real, this concept which is true, they actually do have the right to do this. Is that morally worse than your view that they shouldn't?
To me, yeah.
To you. And that's it, only to you, right? Because it doesn't
Yeah, of
make you feel
course.
good, right?
You can say words like that, like you can say, doesn't make me feel good. That would be more in line with somebody who takes some like emotivist view on that type of thing. But I'm fine with saying that, there's a proposition that, that is wrong. And by that, I mean that, that's something that goes against my values.
Got
or
it.
my desires or preferences
So
in a very strong way.
now we've untangled all of that. This argument actually becomes much easier. So the goal of feminism is to push people or push women specifically towards materialism and not duty. And I think that the belief of people in duty is much more important than the belief of people in materialism. So I think that the idea of having duties to nation, the idea that having duties to family, the idea that having duties to community far outweigh the idea of the right to pursue whatever trivial, meaningless material pursuit that you have. That duty should come first, and that society would look better if they did.
Well, that's okay. There's a few things here. That moves from a descriptive claim to like a applied claim, or like a
Agreed.
normative claim, or a pragmatic thing. And then there's the other type of thing where it's like, you say feminism has like pushed us towards these things, towards these material.
Yeah, do you want a demonstration for that?
Well, really quickly, you think that feminism is pushing people towards subjectivism and that's bad. Like there's a two-pronged claim there, right?
No, less so towards subjectivism, more so towards materialism.
Okay, well, it kind of seemed like you were doing a little bit of equivocating here.
What's the equivocation?
Between subjectivism and materialism. But if you're not, then maybe we can kind of like go
I didn't
back
bring up
through that.
subjectivism there, just
Well,
materialism.
that was what we were just talking about.
No, what we were talking about is after we untangle all of the concepts, all we're really talking about is just everything reduces to beliefs. So all of these concepts of rights, everything else just reduces, at least to you, to believe. I believe thing, which is fine. It's just equal for me to say I believe opposite thing, and those are just as morally valuable as the other, at least from your view.
Well,
that's all I was
No,
establishing.
that's not true. That's not true, actually. So that's a misunderstanding. So
Oh.
when you say that they're equally morally as valuable, well, they're not equally morally as valuable to me.
Yeah.
And then there's a pragmatic claim where we can kind of discuss after that, like, okay, well, let's say we have conflicting values. Then what? What the fuck do we do? It's more so we can then look at, okay, well, what's maybe some underlying values that we share where we can build off of that.
I'm aware of all of that, but no, that would still reduce to relativism then, right? Like, how could you make ever a claim that some other mind, whatever their moral proposition was, if everything is just based on your preference is less good than your preference? How I don't even know how that can be done.
You don't how you just explained it, where you're saying that the things that are good to you aren't the things that are good to me. So you might say, well, these are subjectively good to me, and therefore they're equally as good as the things that you believe. And my response to that would be, no, I don't believe that, because the things that are good to me are my values. Your values don't meet mine.
Perfect. So then you believe that you are the architect of all morality.
And by that you mean?
Everything for which you believe is the ultimate form of morality.
Ultimate form in what way?
There's no other, and no counter moral claims made to you are ever going to be as good as the moral claims you make.
There can be counter moral claims that are made to me that appeal to my values that maybe I'm not aware of, or that I have like conflicting underlying values
they're
that
only
I'm not
good
currently
because you then prefer
thinking
them,
about that.
right?
Sorry?
The only thing that make them good is that you then prefer them.
Yeah, there could be something like that.
Yeah, so then you would be the ultimate
if
architect.
I adopted them for my morality, right? Like that would make that thing good to me.
Well, your morality is the only thing that is good, though.
To me.
Well, what else is good except good to you?
So look, I just said that. It's the thing that I am arbiting is my morals, my moral stances.
So then the only way we can have good is if it's good to you.
Yeah, of course.
So then if that's the case, then all things, you are the ultimate arbiter of goodness.
Of my standard of goodness.
There can't be any other standard of goodness.
There is. I agree. Do you think that I am denying that other people have their own standards? This is circular. I'm making circular?
the argument. I don't know why you're not agreeing with it. Only things which are good to you are good.
The things that are good to me are good to me.
Nothing else is good except things good to you. Nothing else is good except things which you find good.
Well, there can be other people who agree with the things that I find to be good. So then those things are good to me and good to them.
Yeah. But they're only good because they're good to you.
They're only good because they're good to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's things that are good to me, and I can convince other people that they should also find those things to be good.
Can anything be good unless it's good to you?
Are you saying that, can I approve of something and not approve of something at the same time? Well, no.
Yeah, right. So then all goodness comes from you.
All goodness comes from me?
It would have to.
That my standards of good come from me, of course.
Is there any other standard other than yours which is good?
Relative to me?
No.
Unless it aligns with my idea or value, then no.
Then you are the ultimate arbiter of goodness.
Of my own.
That's the only kind that there is. There is no other kind.
No, there
We've
are.
reduced this like 6 times. It always comes back to
if we look at good as values, right?
Yeah.
I'm not denying that you have values. I'm not denying that Brian has values. I'm not denying that, Joshua down the road has values.
Yeah.
So there are things that are good to those other people. But relative to me, unless they align with my values, they're not good.
So then you are a moral relativist.
Look, I'm fine with if you want to call that moral relativism.
What else would it be
fine.
when you say it's relative to you is relative to me?
So where does that bring us? Look, if I just say, look, I am a moral relativist, fine, whatever you want to call it,
yeah, that would be fantastic.
Put on it.
We at least make some headways, because what I'm saying to you is that from a prescriptive claim, then, if it's all just relative, then you can't really say that Islam enslaving women is morally bad. It's just morally bad to you, right? And
no, I am saying that. It is morally bad to me.
And because you can only say it's bad to you. But because it's relative, right? You can't.
It's probably bad to a lot of other people too, but it is bad to me.
But you just said that it's relative. Like, you can't make the claim, really, since it's relative.
Wait,
They're
why?
good to them. It's good to me.
Why?
Well, because otherwise, then just admit you're the ultimate arbiter of all goodness.
Look, that even if I accepted that semantic usage there, that I'm the ultimate arbiter of goodness, which I would add that asterisk on the end, that like, no, I'm the ultimate arbiter of my moral values and my goodness. I mean, that's fine. That doesn't bring us anywhere else. I can still look at people and go, the things that they're doing don't match up with my values, and that to me is bad.
Yeah, but what my claim is that it would have to then necessarily be, and at least it seems to be from all the questions you've answered, that if they don't match up with your values, that is what is bad, and only things which match up with your values are what is good, and nothing else is good.
To me.
And but
I don't disagree. Do you think that
if it's only focused on you, who else could it be focused on?
Do you think? Well, those people have their own values, and to them, things are good. So to them, those things are good. To me, those things are bad, and they don't meet my values.
Okay, got it. So then, when we're talking about duty, right? And here's my claim. Then, I think that duty to materialism makes things bad. That's my claim. I think that, materialism itself generally makes society worse for people to live in. And so I'm going to try to appeal to your values here and ask you, do you think that materialism itself is good for society? Or do you think it's bad for society? The way that I framed materialism.
Material goods can be fulfilling?
That the movement towards materialist goods being fulfilling over other things like duty is bad for society.
I'm not sure what it means to have something like a material good. Maybe you can give me an example of that, a material good being over a duty or something like that. What do you mean?
A material good being over it? Well, so
Right.
a duty or a value of a duty be some type of conception of a thing that you feel you must do, even if it doesn't give you any sort of pleasure. There's nothing that you gain from this, right? Generally, materialism is the opposition. It's the pursuit of material things for the purposes of pleasure or fulfillment or something like this, right? These would be the distinct differences. So duty is not actualizing some pleasure center necessarily. So it's an obligation you feel like you have. So a good example of a duty would be like, you have a child, right? That you're in charge of. Let's say you're babysitting or something like that. You have some sort of duty to make sure this kid is fed, even if you have a bad headache or even if it causes you pain or even if you don't like doing it, right? The pursuit there is something greater than yourself, not just to material goods.
So this is an empirical claim as to whether or not it would be good for society. And it seems like you're kind of
Why would it be empirical?
intermingling. Well, I can answer that question, but it seems like you're intermingling the idea of materialism with subjectivism. So if we say like, the pursuit of material things is good for society overall versus people believing that they have some duty outside of themselves, outside of their values or something like that.
Yeah, well, what I'm drawing is a contrast between how people lived pre-feminist, which was in smaller societies, smaller communities, where duty was something which was focused and pushed on, versus a modern materialist society where duty is not a thing which is pushed out at all, not by modern feminists at all. This is the contrast that I'm showing.
I actually would disagree that like feminists, at large or something like that, probably don't say that you would have duties. Like I think that like feminists think that like women shouldn't essay other women. I think that they believe that women have that duty, whether or not they're talking like a subjectivist or whether or not they're talking like an objectivist or something like that. I think that they do believe those duties exist. And that is another empirical claim as to like what they actually believe. But if we're talking about my version of feminism, right? Like my version of feminism would say, hey, I think that, because of my values, I think that you have reasons to do X, Y, Z. I think you have, reasons to go vote. I think you have reasons to, whatever.
Okay, so I think that it's fair for you to hyper-focus on your version of feminism. Obviously, I'll start caveating questions with under your version of feminism, is this true? Because otherwise I don't know. Under your view then, this argument may be moot. Do you think that women ought to have some duties to society?
Some duties in under my worldview, yeah. I think that women should do things that are good for society per my values.
What?
Yeah, I think women should vote.
They should?
Yeah.
Or they should have the right to vote?
Well, I think both things can be true.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm just asking, should they actually go vote? Do you think they should go do that?
Yeah, I think that women, oh my God.
Like, do they have a duty to do that?
That noise is so loud. Do they have a duty to that? Would I prefer them to? Yeah. I would prefer them to go vote.
So they have a duty to vote. Should there be any consequences if they don't vote?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's no enforcement of any duty there.
No legal consequence, no.
Okay, so then I guess what duties should women have where there's an enforcement behind it? Like, you don't do this duty, there's a consequence.
Yeah, the same types of ones that men have. So if you have a child and you don't take care of it, you leave it malnourished, I think that you have a legal duty to do that. You should be punished in the same way that a man should be.
Okay.
So that's one example.
Okay, so they have some ethical duties. What about societal duties?
Well, that would be a technical societal duties. Maybe I'm not clear what you're looking for.
Oh, I'm just looking for, jury duty's a duty, literally, right? As his name implies.
Sure.
That's like a civic duty or
I
a
think
social duty?
they might have a legal duty to do that. Now, do they have a moral duty? Are they doing something like
Correct,
bad
right.
to me?
That's why I'm looking at,
I'm like,
is there a distinction there between the ethical and the civic duty? So I'm just asking, what duties do you think women socially should have in society?
Legally or ethically?
Legal, or both actually.
Well, those are going to be two different answers, right?
Let's start with legally then.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, they could be things like legally, I think people should be held to go to jury duty. Legally, I think that people should be, prosecuted for crimes. I think they have a duty not to commit crimes against other people. And that's both an ethical and a legal one. Mm-hmm. But the ones that apply to men generally, too. So I'm not sure what this question is getting at.
Do men have a duty to protect women?
Sure.
Okay.
I think people have a duty to protect other people when they can.
Do women have a duty to protect men?
Yeah, when they can.
When they can, as they can. Okay.
Of course.
And this makes society good, right? Or
yeah,
better.
I think people protecting people, it makes a society good.
Okay. Do women have a duty to not be promiscuous?
To not be promiscuous?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by promiscuous?
Have sex with lots of different partners.
That I'm not sure of. I don't know if people would probably say no.
I'm asking you.
I'm not sure. The answer was I'm not sure.
You're not sure if they have that duty?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have a duty to society to not, sleep with multiple partners.
Do they have a duty not to do sex work?
That one would hinge on some empirical facts, like maybe if it caused like a lot of negative outcomes or something like that, and maybe like the benefits didn't override those negative outcomes. That might be one reason why I would say like, okay, well, they do have a duty not to do sex work.
Do they have a duty to stay with their husband even against their own happiness for the sake of their children?
I would probably say no in a lot of cases.
Why not?
Because I think that infringes on people pretty severely when you're in a scenario like that. There could be some negative outcomes for kids. Once again, that would be an empirical claim. That, like, the answer to that would hinge on some empirical facts.
So if I were to give you empirical facts, and of course, during this little 2-hour debate, it's going to be impossible for you to go through any empirical data I would give you in a very, wide overview, right? But if you were given facts then that if women did stay with their husbands, even if they maybe fell out of love with them, they didn't really like him that much anymore, right? Or they really just didn't want to participate in the marriage, but they had children with him, right? And we saw the outcomes for children were way better if they stayed, even if it was at the expense of their happiness. Would you then advise women to stay?
That depends on how much of a toll on their happiness it would take. I think falling out of love when someone...
Let's say it takes a big toll on their happiness.
I'm not sure that that's something I can give you an answer to, whether or not they have some ethical duty to do. That is probably going to be a case-by-case thing. I would have to look at, okay, well, how miserable is this person staying with this person, and how much of a benefit is it going to give their kids? And do they have access to the knowledge of how much benefit it'll give their kids to stay?
So you don't know if they...
I think in the general cases, they don't have an obligation to say, because I think the type of things that lead to divorce are pretty severe. And in a lot of cases...
It's usually irreconcilable differences, not severe.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it's severe usually, actually. I think the things that lead to divorce or irreconcilable differences are not abuse. And it's not even money usually. It's just falling out of love. They just don't like this person, or I don't like their habits anymore, or things like this. But
I'm not sure. I'm not sure falling out of love is always reconcilable. In fact, that sounds kind of miserable to try to force yourself to love someone.
You're not asking it to reconcile and fall back in love, but whether or not they have a duty to stay with their husband for their children, for the sake of their children, because their children get far more desirable outcomes if they do.
Right, but I think that there's probably something empirically there. There's probably a lot of distress that it causes somebody to stay with somebody that they don't love, and to not pursue somebody that they would in fact love.
I agree, it causes them distress. That's what duty does, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes you have duties to things which cause you
estimate.
distress. Yeah.
I'm just making an estimate that no, they probably wouldn't have an obligation to do that.
Now, you've dove into the stats then, so you know probably that when it comes to abuse of children inside of the home of single mothers, are you aware of where that usually comes from?
Where the abuse from single mothers comes from?
For the children.
Sorry,
I'm
not sure what the
children in single mother homes, the abuse rates that happen to them, do you know where that usually comes from?
You might just have to give the answer. I'm not sure what you're asking.
So here, easy. Kid gets abused inside single mom home. Who usually abuses them?
I would assume the parent or other siblings.
No, it's usually... See, in these cases, it's most often step parents in single mother homes.
Okay.
Right? Puts them far more prone for abuse and for all sorts of different things. Now, this isn't to say that step parents are bad, because they're not, right? There's tons of great step parents out there. Nobody's making that claim. Only that if you are with your biological partner, right, or the parent, the biological parent of the children, that the rates of abuse drastically decrease inside those homes for those children, period. Even if the parents stay and they're out of love with each other, they don't even really like each other. You see this often in religious marriages, religious institutions, where they'll stay on behalf of the children. The children's outcomes are generally speaking far and away better.
Really quick, in 5 minutes, we're going to probably do a prompt change, and then we're going to read some chats.
Okay.
Yeah, so continue, but in 5 minutes, we're going to let a couple chats come through.
Okay.
Sure. How long have we been going?
About over an hour, just a bit over an hour.
Jesus.
Yeah, it takes a long time just to untangle worldviews. It does.
Yeah.
There's nothing you
No
can do
trust
about
right
We
it.
can stick on the feminism for a bit longer, but in 5 minutes, we're going to let some
No
do a
problem.
little break.
I need to have a smoke anyway,
Okay.
so that's all
We
good.
have some Zen coming too.
Good.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So the problem there is I think there would probably be a data collection problem there. When you have people who are remarried, it's probably easier for kids to report that a step parent is committing abuse versus a biological parent. A child might be more trusting of their biological parents, especially if they're still together. There might be covering up of abuse that's occurring, so that I might have some issues with like gathering that data and actually coming to like a conclusion there. But I would say that
Would something like multiple meta-analyses on that data do something to assuage your doubts?
Meta-analyses on the data that says that
Step parents are more prone to abuse than the biological father.
sure, I mean that's fine, but there once again I would need to see that data. I'd have to go through it, see what kind of methodological problems exist there, because I would suspect that the abuse would go a lot less reported, because that's something that you can't account for. If a kid's not going to report it, a kid's not going to report it. But you can make an inference and say like, okay, well, kids are typically more trusting. Kids come out years later and say, hey, my biological parents abused me and I never told anybody. And sometimes they don't even tell teachers.
Well, I mean, a lot of these studies they're going over multiple decades, right? And so is the meta-analysis.
Sure,
going
that
over
doesn't get rid of
multiple
the problem.
decades, it gets rid of some of those problems, but doesn't get rid of all of them. I agree.
Not the data collection, not the issue. It doesn't make that type of problem go away.
Which
Why
type,
would gathering
which type of problem specifically?
the problem of abuse being covered up or children being more trusting of biological parents?
So that could be the case. I was just talking when you were saying like children could come out later and discuss abuse rates or something like that. It's like, yeah, that's true, but one way that you could compensate for that is to have longevity in your study, following these same people, and then getting back with them 20 years later or whatever, so that you could make these determinations. So that would be one way that you could compensate.
Sure,
for that.
and it might still not fully compensate for it though. If that person still is more trusting of their biological parent.
Yeah,
so it doesn't fully get rid of that
I don't
issue.
disagree. I was just saying that here there is some things that you could do, but I agree, right? But I would say that a meta-analysis, multiple meta-analysis, that would at least be something you'd look at.
And I want to make it clear, the claim that I'm disputing isn't necessarily that step parents don't abuse their children more than biological parents do. That could be very well true. But what I'm saying is, when we do have an issue finding that out, we have an issue of children trusting their biological parents more. But we also have the issue of sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm really thirsty. That might be a good time for a break, but we do have that methodological issue. Over time, it doesn't really get rid of it, though, if children still trust their biological parents more. And it could be the case like parents are covering it up for the other parent, whereas they wouldn't cover it up for like a new spouse or something like that. Or they might cover it up to keep the family together. That could also be a case that I would say would cause a lot of issues collecting that type of data.
Okay.
And those reasons the abuse might still not outweigh the type of harm done to the person staying with the person they don't want to be with.
All right.
Andrew, you get to stay just while the chats come through,
course.
and then I'll
Then
I'll
have
go
a
over
smoke
some
and we'll
other
finish,
things
yep.
just for a little smoke break.
Sure.